Today, we're looking at a blue ink by Rohrer and Klingner, their Salix. It is an iron gall ink. Now, as always, there's timestamps down below so you could skip around, but if you've got the time, I'd appreciate you checking out the entire video. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. Now, if you're interested in different blue inks, there's a link to that playlist down in the description. To standardize some of the writing samples, we always start out with Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia dot pad. Let's take a look at that first one, 90 GSM Clairfontaine. We have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen. It does offer some shading. When you look at the Klingner, it starts a bit darker. It does shade even throughout there, but it gets lighter about the NG and then much darker at the NER. The extra fine is a little bit lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, lots of shading throughout. Quick starts light, works its way dark. Over starts light and works its way dark. It's very nice here. 14 seconds to dry. The medium is the same tone as the extra fine, with no feather spread, halo sheen, great shading. Look at brown. It goes dark to light to dark to light to dark. Gorgeous. 23 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show good color variation because we get that in the writing, and the smear test says you could recover this if you smeared while you were writing. To have a range of experience with this ink, all of the writing samples are always done with this Jinhao 159 with a 1.1 stub, the Jinhao X450 with a medium, and the Jinhao X750 with an extra fine. Then, a Noodler's Nib Creeper was inked up, used for a day, and used to take the notes for this video. Now let's look at the second standard paper, 52 GSM Tomoe River. We have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. The extra fine is quite a bit lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, moments of shading like the K in quick. The end of the lazy goes from a bit darker to lighter and 23 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone as the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen. The shading stands out a little bit better. The goes from light to dark, quick goes from light to dark, fox goes from light to dark. Very nice in just beautiful. 37 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show good color variation, and we do get it in the writing. And the smear test, you could recover this if you smeared while you were writing, even on the Tomoe River. I agree with Vita. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down, and then it's immediately put in the water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see this kind of grayish line at the bottom, but blue is pushing its way up. Now the one on the right is let dry for 10 minutes before it's dunked into water. And you see a lot of that ink really is forming that line on the bottom. That gray and the blue seem to be staying. Some of the blue is moving up. And then there's this sort of pale color at the very top of it where the water continued moving up. This one I let dry for 24 hours before it was dunked into water. Now, the line at the bottom is very much the same, and strangely, about as much ink did push up the filter paper as with the one let dry for 10 minutes. On this one, it was allowed to dry for 72 hours, and you see that blue line is very much the same, and the most noticeable difference is a lot less of this blue is creeping its way up the paper, which does show how permanent this is going to be. The last standard paper is 80 GSM Rhodia dot pad. We have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade. The extra fine is lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, some spots of shading. Look at how brown starts darker and works its way lighter. Fox goes from lighter to darker. 16 seconds to dry. The medium is the same tone as the extra fine. No feather spread, halo sheen, some nice shading. Brown goes from darker to lighter to darker. Quick goes from light to dark. Fox goes from light to dark. 23 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show good color variation, and we are getting that in the writing. And the smear test, you could recover this if you smeared while you were writing. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink could be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. The smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it performs incredibly well. There would be no fear in using this as a note taker if you wanted to go back and highlight. That really shows through when you look at the water, which had no effect on it whatsoever. Now, Pen Flush is starting to break this ink up and really lighten it, but a lot of it is really being left in place. It's not getting rid of it. Now, the 1/3 bleach solution is completely removing it from the page. It would take a bit longer to get it off of the paper, but it could remove it. That all being said, I only had to use water to get this out of my pen. Additional writing samples are done on different papers in order to change up the experience with the inks. And here, I was curious because it was a lighter blue, what would happen if we put it onto the yellow Rhodia? So with all of the performance largely being the same, I was curious if that light blue would turn a little bit more of a light green. And it really doesn't. Because it dries to a kind of grayish blue, it's really held on to that. Meaning this is a very opaque ink in itself when it dries and when you're using it. So it would easily stand up in a professional environment. For the inks tested, the average viscosity was 2.5. with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Rohrer and Klingner's Salix has a viscosity of 1.81, making this a pretty wet ink, which, having tested a bunch of iron gall inks, is not necessarily the normal. If you're interested in how the viscosity is tested and how the bell curve is made, there's a link to that video down in the description. The next paper is black and red notebook paper. We have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen. It does have moments of shading, just moments, like in the middle of Salix, you see a couple spots where it's a little bit lighter, but for the most part, we're not experiencing a lot of shade there. The extra fine is slightly lighter than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, much better shading. Quick goes from darker to lighter to darker. Jumps goes from lighter to darker. 5 seconds to dry, so really good as a note taker. Extra fine is about the same tone as, medium is about the same tone as the extra fine. With no feather spread, halo sheen, some decent shade. Quick goes dark to light to dark. Over starts a little lighter, gets dark quickly. 8 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both show color variation. I think we get a lot more here than we did in the medium. The smear test shows you could recover this if you smeared while you were writing. For the inks tested, the average dry time is 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Rohrer and Klingner's Iron Gall Salix has an average dry time of 23 seconds, which is a bit longer dry time than normal. The last writing sample is done on white lines paper. We have no bleeding, no ghosting, which is really good because this paper's not made for fountain pens. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen. It offers a little bit of shading, like you look at the N in Klingner, a little bit lighter. You look at Salix, shows a little bit of color variation in it where the A gets a bit lighter, but there's not a ton up here. The extra fine is a bit lighter than the stub. No feather spread, halo sheen, no shade. Again, really only moments. I guess there's just moments. The stub had moments. This has moments. 5 seconds to dry. The medium is a little darker than the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen, moments of shading still. The fox starts a little lighter, gets a little darker. But moments. The moments are enough that it does show up, but it's just harder to really pinpoint, even looking at the camera screen. So over starts a little lighter and gets a little darker. It shows here better than it did in the extra fine. The scrubby for both do show some color variation. Again, it showed better in the medium than it did in the extra fine. The smear test says you'd likely recover it if you smeared while you were writing. Instead of finding inks that look like Rohrer and Klingner Salix, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I went for a nice magenta from Papier Plume, their Burgundy. Now, if you'd prefer a different complement color, then take a look down in the description where you're going to see links to playlists sorted by color. What do I think of Rohrer and Klingner Salix? As a blue, this is very gray leaning, which makes me think of the color Payne's Gray. I oddly found that the nib creeper sometimes suffered from ink starvation during extended writing sessions, which is not a problem I really tend to have with that pen. It has made me a little less fond of this ink, but I think any of that flow issue could be solved with the Van S White Lightning. So what nib and pen would give the best writing experience with this ink? I really like how it looks from a wet fine. Now that's to help try and avoid some of the ink starvation, but you could probably get away with almost any pen. Just watch its flow and consider that Van S White Lightning in order to offset that if you needed to for its flow. I hope you got something out of this video, and I hope to see you tomorrow when we take a look at Pen BBS number 130.